Hi, this is Brett Ingram, entrepreneur and award-winning product creator, and today I want to share with you 2 simple habits that'll make you happier every day. For most of us, our lives are easy on the surface. If we compare ourselves to any time in history and we look at basically the way that we run our daily lives and what we have to do, we're so far removed from daily survival that if we compare it to, obviously centuries past, everything is so much easier. We have a lot more creature comforts. Life in and of itself appears to be easier because we're so far removed from needing to do the things we would need to do just to live, just to survive. And so it becomes more about finding our passion and doing things that we really find fulfilling and that we are good at, as opposed to things like hunting for food or being able to make clothes or things like that. But obviously, with sort of all that evolution and the place that we've come as a society, there's also a flip side to it. Because when we aren't in a situation where we're fighting for survival, then we actually have time to think and we have time to consider the meaning in all this. If you are in a situation where you have to run out and, kill some kind of animal or do some fishing or whatever, or gather some plants so you have something to eat today, you're probably not going to be spending a lot of time contemplating the meaning of life. You just have to get things done in order to be able to survive. Once you get past all that basic stuff, then you start to think about things that have more meaning and what everything what it all means, what the purpose of all of this is. And so when we start to do that, with the explosion of connectivity that we have nowadays, also with the internet, we can see everyone who has what we don't. And so while on some levels life is easier, on others it's actually much harder because the bar is much higher. The expectations and sort of the window dressing of what we think things should be like is such different reality than it ever was in the past. I remember even when I was applying for college, I didn't know where any of my friends applied. I had no idea where they got accepted or they didn't because we just never really talked about it. Everything was done with paper applications. You mailed it in, and then people would share where they got in after they got in. You never know how many schools they applied to, which ones they got rejected from, whatever. Now, everything is online. It's all public. Everybody knows that the acceptances come out on the same day for certain schools. So anyone who applied to certain schools all know on that day whether they got in or not. It's so much more public. It's so much more difficult. So if we're feeling low, or if we just want some simple ways to be happier in general, because of this sort of general idea that things can be challenging and difficult, here are 2 things that really work. They actually only take a few minutes, and if we do them consistently enough, then we can make them become habits so they're automatic for us in terms of the way that we live. And I think it's really a timely topic because of the fact that we have epidemic levels of anxiety and stress and unhappiness and, all of these other kinds of things. And I think a lot of it stems from those various issues. So I think we just need to sort of shift our focus in order to be able to get back to what's really important and what really matters. So the first of the 2 things that we could do is flat out just feel gratitude. And the emphasis in that is on the word feel, because we can think about intellectually stuff that we can, force ourselves to feel grateful about. But the reality of it is that doesn't really do anything transformatively in our own bodies and our own minds. When we start to feel something, that's where there's a transformation. So when we start to really get in the moment of feeling grateful for something, that has a magical transformative power. In general, as people, and not everybody, but this as a generalization, we naturally focus on the bad stuff that happens, right? So we go through our day, we get up in the morning, and then, we flip on the news on our way out to work or, whatever we're doing, driving the kids to school, and you see a negative story about something bad that happened. So that's one little thing. It's sort of like a ding, right? And then a little bit later, like we're driving and then we catch every red light on the way to where we're going. So that we get a little grumbly about that. And that's another ding. And then, we get home and there's a message from somebody saying they need this or they need that or something. And it's one thing after another and it starts to build up. And these are the things that a lot of times we focus on. So what ends up happening is it builds up and it builds up. And so by the end of the day, even though they're all small, minor things, the general idea, the general sort of feeling that it creates is this negative, unhappy, stressful, anxious feeling. And it does that without us even realizing it a lot of times. We aren't consciously thinking, wow, I really feel miserable today because these 6 different things that happened to me. It just has this cumulative effect where it just beats on you and beats on you till you get to a point where you start to really feel that way. And you may not even know why. We might not even be conscious of it or aware of it, but we just start to feel crummy. And that is sort of a negative mind frame where we don't really want to be. By flipping the script, by consciously focusing on what we're grateful for and recognizing all the little things that go right in a given day, right? We start to focus on the good stuff. The interesting thing about that is it's the same principle. So that also builds up, but it creates a positive, happy, content feeling the same way. And so it's super powerful if you think about those two in opposition to each other. How would we rather feel each day? Would we rather feel negative and sort of down about everything? Because we can certainly find plenty of stuff to be upset about, right? In any given day, if you work at it, you can find things to be upset about or negative about very, very easily. At the same time, if we really stop and think about it, we can also find things to be very happy about and grateful for every single day. And so one of the great ways to practice this, to actually put it into action, is an exercise that takes literally just a couple of minutes a day. And it's to think of 5 things each day. And you want to try to make them different each day. You can repeat some, but it's important to make them different and not just keep going over the same worn tread, because it loses its effectiveness if you do the same thing every day. But basically, you want to think about things that you're grateful for. They could be tiny. They could be people in your life. They could be things that happen or that you're grateful for or whatever. Things that you have or things that, any of these kinds of things. And it could be anything from the present day all the way back to when you were a kid. It doesn't even matter. The time frame doesn't matter. What matters is that we get ourselves into that moment where we're actually closing our eyes and feeling that gratitude in that moment. Because that effort, that action of actually feeling that creates an emotional response. And when that happens, it transforms the way that we think. It transforms the way that we feel. It's impossible to be down or negative when we're feeling grateful. It's just impossible. So if we do this and we do this every single day and we try to think of new ones and we constantly expand out what we're feeling grateful for, the general idea is that in general we just become more positive and grateful. And that in and of itself is transformative. So it's a great little exercise. There's a man named John Kralik, and he wrote a book called A Simple Act of Gratitude. And this particular guy, sort of the summary of it is, he had hit rock bottom. He was in a really bad place in his life. He was totally broke. He was miserable. He was overweight. He had been through 2 divorces. And he had a moment where he just decided what he was going to do is for the next year, he was going to write a handwritten thank you note every single day to somebody in his life that he was grateful for. And that's it. Not expecting anything in return, just writing a handwritten thank you note, knowing that writing something by hand has a different impact. It has an impact when we're doing it on us, but it also has an impact on the person receiving it, because there's something totally different about something handwritten or hand done than something that is machine created, no matter how elegantly it's laid out. And so this is what he did over the course of 365 days, and he just wrote one out. And he tells the story, and I won't spoil it for you, but he tells the story about how doing that absolutely transformed his life. And it's a great lesson, and it's another powerful way to practice gratitude. So, the 5 things a day is one avenue to do it. And it's one way that we can do it. Another way is to do thank you notes or whatever it is. It's whatever works for you that makes you feel that way. But it's impossible to write a handwritten thank you note to somebody or a gratitude note without feeling gratitude. It's impossible because you're in that moment expressing it to them, so you're feeling it yourself. And when you do that, it has a transformative effect on the way that you feel. It has a transformative effect on the way you think, and even what you filter and recognize throughout the day. When you go through the day starting with that mindset, you start to notice all the little things that actually went really well instead of all the negative things. And so your entire focus shifts and your entire mindset shifts, and it puts you in a much happier, less anxious place. So that's one thing that we can do that certainly can make us happier every single day. And the second thing that we can do is to be in the moment, right? Be in the moment. So many of us, especially entrepreneurs and business owners, we have so much to do that whatever we're currently doing, we're looking ahead, we're thinking ahead. Oh, what else do I need to get done? What are the other things on the priority list? What are the things that, I'm falling behind on and I can't let, and we don't stop enough to take, stock of just what's going on in the moment, be present in the moment and feel great about that. And it may sound cliche, but it's absolutely true. When we stop and we actually experience things as opposed to always looking toward what's next. I see this actually in conversations. I've been guilty of it a lot myself. If you've ever been in a conversation with somebody, and maybe you've been on one side of this or the other, where you can see that the other person is sort of chomping at the bit to say something. You're talking or they're talking and you can't wait because you have a story to share that's going to also, but we aren't really listening. We aren't really paying attention to what they're saying because we're so anxious to respond with what we have to say. And, it's the same kind of idea just with experiential things. When we're in a situation, but we're thinking about, well, when I get home, I got to do this, or when I get out of this, or I got to, make this phone call as soon as this thing is over. We're just getting through things instead of enjoying things. And that's not a great way to go about it because we're always going to be reaching for something when we do that. We don't stop long enough to enjoy the present because we always feel the pull of the future. And the problem with that is it creates stress, it creates anxiety, and it creates pressure, which again leads us to a negative place, even if we aren't aware or conscious of it. And look, I make no bones about it. These kinds of things take practice. They absolutely take practice. They're very simple, but they do take practice because if our mindset is generally the opposite, anytime we try to develop a new habit, it takes a little bit of time to do it. But if we're conscious of that and we focus on it, we do it over and over again, it becomes easier and it starts to become more of a habit. Look, I still struggle with it myself sometimes, and I'm aware of it. I know about this, and even still, I'm not always good at it. But when we force ourselves to focus on what we're doing now, what we're experiencing now, what happens is we open up a whole new world. We start to recognize and appreciate the little things. We discover new sources of joy and happiness and fulfillment. And we connect much better with the people in our lives. That's super important because ultimately that's where the richness comes. I mean, if we really stop and think about it, in the end, what are we racing to, right? What's the rush? So, yes, there are deadlines and yes, everybody runs on a timeline, but at the end of the day, right, there will come a day where it's the last one. There's nothing left to do. And at that point, we don't want to think about all the stuff that we always were looking to do next. We want to be able to reflect back on all the stuff that we did and what great experiences those were and how much we enjoyed it by being in the moment. Because life is about experience. It's not about activity. It's not about activity. That doesn't mean we don't strive for things. It doesn't mean we aren't, ambitious or motivated to do what we want, but it's about experiencing it as we go along and enjoying the process, right? So the more things that we can take in along the way, the richer our lives become. I'm a big fan of TV and movies, as I've mentioned a bunch of times, and one of the shows I really like. It's a reality show, The Amazing Race. And one of the things I love about it is I love the fact that you get to see all these different places in the world. And I love the challenges that everybody does because they're doing these things that are unique to the area that they're in, or it's at least giving them a different way to experience the place that they're traveling to. The average person, we go on a vacation, we experience things, we go see some of the sights, but we see it from that perspective. If you're rappelling off a giant building in a foreign city or something like that, it's a completely different experience. So I've always thought that was really cool. But there's one season in particular that always stands out to me. And it was a season with these two young guys that were a team. And one of the things that really amazed me about it, it's a few years back. So the casting has evolved. And a lot of times now they get people on the show that for the most part are pretty happy, easygoing, and they understand to enjoy the experience. But in the earlier seasons, you had a lot of people that had a ton of anxiety. They would fight with each other. They had a lot of negativity. And I remember thinking, you're being filmed. You're going to be on national TV. You're going to watch this back and you're going to be embarrassed. But there were these two young guys, and they really stood out to me because they had this amazing attitude. Like every country they went to, they tried to study a little bit about it, learn a little bit about it, learn the customs, learn how to say hello and thank you and all these other things. And they were so gracious to everybody that they met. And they went into every single challenge, whether they were terrified of it, whether they loved it, with absolute reckless abandon and just joy. And I thought to myself, wow, what an amazing thing. What an amazing thing to be able to go into an experience like that and just no matter what, always feel the joy about what it is that you're able to do. And I just found that so envious. And the crazy thing is, they ended up winning. But even if they didn't, every single leg, they had this gratitude. They were just overwhelmed and overjoyed by the fact that they were experiencing this. And I was jealous of it because I looked at that and I said, geez, first of all, I'm terrified of heights. So I'm not going to be jumping out of any airplanes anytime soon or rappelling off giant buildings. But beyond that, I just, at the time anyway, especially, I didn't have that attitude. I was so sort of closed to that kind of thing, but I recognized it, and I recognized how awesome that is, and I recognized how awesome it would be to be like that. And I was like, oh, I just want to be able to have that kind of, just pure joy about experiencing life. And so I always, looked up to that and envied that because I thought, what an amazing attitude to have and what an amazing way to go about this. And they deserved to win, and they did. And I was super happy about that too. But the point is, when we're in the moment, we get so much more out of life because we're not always focused on what's next or what we need to do in the future. There are always going to be tasks. There's always going to be a to-do list. It's never going to end, and it's never going to have a finish line. So we might as well enjoy the experience and the journey because that's ultimately where it all comes from too. So the takeaway here is that happiness ultimately is a choice, and it's a state of being. It's not a destination. If we spend our days focusing on the bad stuff around us and the things that we don't have or that others do that we wish we had, we'll end up feeling frustrated, unhappy, jealous, and always searching or reaching for something that we're never going to get. If instead we recognize the people and things in our lives we're grateful for, and we decide to live in the moment and experience life, we can feel happy and fulfilled every single day.